Squirrels! So hello, and welcome to another Legends of Runeterra video. My name is Chris, and today I think we have a pretty interesting topic to talk about, and that is trying to decipher which of these champions came out a little bit different than perhaps the devs, first expected when they first started working on designing these champions. Which one of the ones did they, get midway through and then go, yeah, no, let's change this completely and do something completely different? Because, as we know, recently, with the introduction of Ziggs, it has been confirmed that Ziggs was changed from his initial state, where he used to have an aura-type effect that would, increase the damage of certain spells. Think akin to a Funsmith, akin to a Dreadway. That kind of effect used to be on Ziggs, and, potentially, some of the other stuff was already embedded in there as well, like the landmarks and stuff like that. But that explains the existence of cards like Ziggs Bouncing Bomb being his champion spell, which, you might look at now and kind of go like, what does this have to do with the champion at all? But it makes more sense once you know that that used to be the case, that he had an aura effect on him. And this I thought was really interesting in trying to figure out, could we go back and look at the champions that are in the game now and kind of figure out, wait, this card doesn't make any sense. I wonder if this champion has changed. That I thought was a really interesting idea, to go back and try and look at the other champions that may have been changed before they were released. And so, but other cards, non-champion cards that perhaps, weren't seen as important, didn't get changed. And so they were kind of just left feeling a bit weird. Now, I'm not referring to just bad cards. I think a classic example that some of you might be screaming at the screen is something like Sunk Cost. But this is not what I'm talking about at all. This is a bad card, but it's a bad card for a reason, right? It's the Bilgewater landmark removal card, and Bilgewater is not meant to have good landmark removal. That's pretty much all this I have to say about this card. But if we go into Bandle City, cards like Ziggs Bouncing Bomb, and there's others as well, the Mega Inferno Bomb, that I don't even have unlocked, I don't think. No, I don't. This card as well, deal 1 to all enemies, then do it again. This one as well doesn't make any sense without Ziggs' actual ability. So, let's dive into the list, and, some of these I'm sort of more certain about, and some is kind of a bit of a guess, but I'll tell you the reasoning why I think some of these champions may have been changed. So the first one we have on our list is Fizz, and this is one of the ones that I'm less certain about, but let me talk you through the basic methodology of what I did to come up with this list. Essentially, what I did was look at every single champion and kind of figured out pretty quickly on, as I was trying to search through every champion and all the cards that kind of came with them and look at that. But then I figured out a sort of pattern of the first couple that I was noticing could maybe have been changed. It's all to do with their champion spell, and it's how much sense their champion spell makes with the actual card and what it does now. For instance, Twisted Fate has a champion spell that draws more cards. Twisted Fate's level up wants you to draw cards. Makes sense, right? Gangplank's champion spell is Parlay, that will deal 1, to anything, and then if it kills a unit, deal 1 to the enemy nexus. Makes sense for something that wants you to deal damage to the enemy nexus in 5 different rounds. These champion spells, they make sense, right? But Fizz didn't. And I should say, this doesn't quite work for every single champion. A good example is Nautilus. Nautilus's champion spell doesn't really work with Deep, but when you dive into the followers, a lot of them do just they toss, and they're either sea monsters or they say toss on them like Drake Dredgers or sea monsters. So it all did make sense. So I'm sure that Nautilus wasn't really changed at all, right? So with that in mind, let's talk about the champions that have weird champion spells that maybe don't fit. And then I looked at sort of their followers as well, and then also kind of went, this is a bit odd. So let's start with Fizz, right? And so we're going into Rising Tides here. We're not including sort of the newer cards that came out with Fizz, because that wasn't for Fizz's initial design. He was meant to come out with Rising Tides, and so we're looking at the cards that came out in Rising Tides with Fizz. And if we look at them, we first off have the Attune cards, right? So they kind of fit Fizz's main themes of, wanting to play spells. That I completely understand. All of the Attune cards get a tick. They're off the hook, right? But what kind of weirded me about Fizz, and why I think he should be on this list, is there really, for a champion whose level up is concerned with playing spells, there really isn't that many spells for Fizz to play. And I do, and obviously we've seen sort of pranks come around now, and I wonder if that was almost because they realized that that happened to Fizz. You know, maybe it was a mistake on that behalf. But if we look at, say, the other champion that came in Rising Tides with a similar level up condition in Lee Sin, you know, we get spells like Lee Sin's champion spell, in fact, Sonic Wave, which was a spell that created another spell. And we also got things like Retreat Return and multiple, you know, versions of that. Spells that create spells make sense for a champion with a level up of you cast 6 spells. Now, we got a Tune, which does help, but we didn't get any spells that create spells, really, or anything like that. I think things like Jailbreak, maybe, and Double Trouble were meant for Fizz, but if you go through the list of spells and think, like, which ones are to do with Fizz, you know, like, Warning Shot isn't, Jailbreak maybe, Jettison no, Parlay no, Ye Be Warned doesn't feel very Fizz, like, you know, it's not like a, I would say no. Make It Rain is obviously Misfortune's champion spell. More Powder, no. Pick a card, no. Double Trouble, maybe. Lure the Depths, no. Like, Pilfer Goods, not really. Pocket Aces, like, it works well with Fizz, but, you know, is obviously a reference to Twisted Fate and has Twisted Fate's thing. Sleight of Hand is a Plunder card, so maybe, but not really. Chum the Waters, okay, but again, it's slow speed. Obviously, Fizz's champion spell, Playful Trickster, is like, yeah, maybe. Riptide, no. Salvage, not really. Although, maybe Salvage, but it's a toss card, so not really. No. Double Up, not really. Strong Arm, no. Mind Meld is kind of the first solid one that I'll definitely say, like, a definite yes. And Scrap Shot, no. And those were all the spells that came out, which is kind of weird. That you kind of go through all of the spells, and the champion that has a spell requirement level up really doesn't have that many options. So it does make me wonder, did Fizz have like a different level up? Did he have like a different ability? You know, was he more to do with the one drop kind of synergy type thing? You know, is that what Fizz was initially going for? Maybe. But even that is kind of a stretch that I'm not sure is like fully related to Fizz at all. You know, these cards on Jailbreak, you know, don't mention Fizz. So yeah, I don't really know. Bit weird. Bit odd, so Fizz is my first consideration. Okay, the next one I think is an absolute slam dunk, no one can disagree, and that is Zilean. Zilean, obviously, again, if we look at the champion spell, pretty weird, right? Like, what does this have to do with Zilean at all? I don't know. And if we, you know, dive into looking at the predict cards, as people pointed out, you know, kind of at the time, there's some odd inclusions here, like Time in a Bottle. Is a clear reference to Zilean, but advancing an allied landmark 2 rounds has nothing to do with Zilean at all. And there was, you know, there was kind of more of a landmark synergy thing going on with Zilean as well. You know, Imagine Possibilities is, you know, I mean, that sounds like a Zilean card. You know, Time is Effervescent. Zilean. This, you would assume, was a Zilean card, but again, doesn't really have much to do with Zilean. So, you know, I think in this one we can almost predict that the time bombs like had a bigger countdown and maybe a bigger effect, but they thought maybe it was too strong or too difficult to bounce, so they ended up changing it for whatever reason. That I would not be surprised with at all, but I think that this one is pretty clear. Something changed with Zilean. I don't think it was the predict side of it. I think that that was always a part of Zilean's, you know, identity, but there was something changed here with the time bombs. I can almost guarantee that the first iteration of time bomb had a bigger countdown, almost certainly. Next up is Katarina, and Katarina, obviously we have the Death Lotus, again a champion spell that makes really no sense, and this made me wonder, because what are Katarina's followers? I kind of went through, and I was thinking about it, and I think I've ended up on the Legion cards, all the cards that say Legion on them, I think. Hear me out. I think that Draven's cards are cards like Arena Bookie and Shiraza the Blade and Kato and Savage Reckoner as well. Like, all the Arena cards, I think, are the Draven cards, right? And then all the Darius cards, I think, are the Trifarian cards. The 5 attack cards, I think that makes the most sense. And that leaves kind of, you know, Vladimir has, like, his Crimson cards. And then I think the Legion cards are for Katarina, although, you know, that doesn't make the most sense with all of them, but you do have Legion Marauder where it does make sense and you get the attack off, but then it also leaves some interesting like extra things that are in here. And what caught my attention was Legion General is probably the one that makes the most sense for Katarina because of the recall thing going on, right? But obviously Legion General is to do with stuns as well, and you get things like potentially Minotaur Reckoner, you know, with the whole stun thing going on. And it made me think, there are a lot of stun cards in Noxus that obviously go with Yasuo. But I wonder at some point if Katarina, instead of recalling, had some kind of stun ability. And my reasoning for that is that there are obviously a lot of like stun cards in here, in Noxus, but there isn't a stun champion. Now I know that Yasuo and Katarina are sort of meant to go together, but I would have expected more recall cards in Noxus if that was the case. And instead we got a lot of stun cards. And Death Lotus is kind of a weird thing, but it makes more sense with kind of like Yasuo's ability than it does Katarina's. You know, you're dealing damage to units and you're kind of slowly picking them off, and then you can use like a Death Lotus to like finish them off. That to me makes more sense than what Katarina ended up being. It kind of works, I guess. But when I thought about this, I thought, oh my god, both of those champions would have been so much better if Katarina was just an extra stun champion. Like straight away, both Katarina and Yasuo would have been 10 times better if they just would have had Katarina be a stun champion in Noxus. And then you would actually have like, you know, a full set of champions in the 2 regions with the most good stun cards. That would have actually worked. And we could have had 2 playable champions. And instead we ended up with 2, you know, not so playable champions. But yes, I do wonder if, you know, something changed along the lines. Or if even, you know, Katarina had a kind of AoE damage effect, you know, to go along with Yasuo dealing some damage as well. That I wouldn't be surprised with either. But it all just feels a bit weird. Next up, another one that I think we can all agree on as well, and it's the other side of Predict, and that's Echo. And obviously Echo's Cold Shot, bit of a weird champion spell, like, you know, it's okay, but it's a bit weird. And the first clue was concurrent timelines, you know, which again is an obvious reference to Echo. Obviously the quote here is by Echo on concurrent timelines, and this came out before Echo did. And kind of has this neat effect, but kind of ended up being like its own standalone card, completely devoid of the rest. And then you got like some Predict cards, and a lot of other cards, you know, that didn't say Predict. And, you know, one of the big problems with Echo is that there just isn't enough cards that say Predict on them. You only got 2. In fact, you got Time Trick, and you got Practical Perfectionist, and then that was it. You know, these 2 obviously had nothing to do with it. Terran Sunworker kind of did, but, you know, there just isn't enough Predict. Boom Boom Boom, obviously. Adaptatron, no. Production Surge, no. So you're kind of left with these, and yeah. It does make me wonder, like, you know, is concurrent timelines like a clue that, you know, a transform effect was more of Echo's thing? You know, where you go back and you change things rather than Predict things. It does make me wonder if Echo was, you know, at first something just a bit different, and then they just, you know, didn't put in enough Predict cards, perhaps. Interesting one, I think. The next one is kind of a bit tenuous. I'm not like certain of this one, but it's Poppy. And Poppy, again, weird champion spell, right? Like Poppy's Keeper's Verdict, like not necessarily a terrible card, but just like weird. Just a weird, like, weird champion spell for what the rest of Poppy is doing, right? And then there's another card as well with Poppy's face on it, Heroic Charge, which again, an ally strikes an enemy. If it survives, stun it. Like, again, just a bit weird. Like, why? Why is this? It does make the existence of these 2 cards makes me wonder if Poppy, like, you know, was a much slower, like, card earlier on. Because these are weird cards to be, like, including with Poppy. You know, they're kind of slow and they're kind of almost control-like, in a sense. And obviously Poppy has ended up in the complete opposite direction. Like, as far away from, like, slow, you know, targeting control as you can get. She's, like, the fastest, you know, go wide aggro strategy you can be. Which is kind of weird. You know, it does make you think. It really, really kind of does make you think. And finally, we have Sejuani, and Sejuani is kind of different to all of the others because this one has been known for some time, and that is because Sejuani, I mean, the champion spell is a bit weird. Like if you compare it to Gangplank, you know, who has Gangplank's Parlay, you know, if you're in the north, like it's a bit like it doesn't help you level up Sejuani at all, and like it's not a bad spell for Sejuani to have. Like it does make sense with the card, like it has Overwhelm, so it does make some sense. Don't get me wrong, but again, a little weird. But Sejuani is not just for her champion spell. This one goes back to before Sejuani even came out, because when you start looking at Sejuani's, you know, cards that came out with Sejuani, you have cards like Ember Maiden and Wolf Rider and, you know, Tusk Raider, Sejuani's ship. They all say Plunder on them. They're all kind of, you know, are helping you achieve Plunder or have a Plunder effect. So the cards that came out with Sejuani are fine. It's more so the cards that Sejuani did not come out with. And this is the clues we need to look at, because Scarthane Stefan literally mentions Sejuani. I sealed my oath to the Winter's Claw when Sejuani gave me my first scar. Every scar since has been earned in her service. So we had references to Sejuani before Sejuani came out. And it's not like, you know, it is today where, you know, sets come out in blocks of 3 and maybe you'll get a little hint for them. Rising Tides just came out with all the cards straight up. So essentially, and these cards have always existed in this state, really. They were kind of there without a champion. You know, we had none of these champions really worked with those cards. I mean, Vladimir kind of did, but I mean, no Freljord champion really worked with the Scar cards, which is kind of weird. Again, like every region has like a couple cards that, you know, are kind of like on their own, kind of standalone, like, you know, kind of generic cards, you could say, that don't really fit necessarily with a champion. You know, they're just kind of to fill out the region. But this is like a very specific archetype. You know, they all have Scar in the name. Stefan on Scarred Reaver, of course, Scar Mother Vrina. Like, they've all got that. They have references to Sejuani in them. And yet Sejuani doesn't synergize with them at all. And so this, you know, has long been theorized that Sejuani was initially meant to come out in the first set and be a part of this kind of Scar kind of deck, you know, and potentially synergize with Vladimir. But they obviously ended up changing that idea and then going for Sejuani to be in the Plunder side instead. And I mean, that ended up being pretty successful, so I'm not going to, you know, denounce them for that. But that's kind of interesting that maybe they did change Sejuani's design, and, you know, having like a card that's been damaged, like having like a big combat trick that, you know, really heal it back up. You know, combat tricks are really good in a deck where you want to damage your own units to give them extra stuff. Like combat tricks, you know, you're going to need them because you, again, want your unit to survive the next time and the next time, right? So having a combat trick champion spell would make potentially more sense if Sejuani was like to do with damaging your own units, you know, so that they could survive that combat and get damaged again. That, I think, would make more sense. So that, I thought, was a pretty interesting one as well. But that was it for all of the champions. And as I say, I kind of reduced this down to like looking at the champion spells. And some I think are more clear than others. You know, if we do look at Ziggs, like it's very clear on Ziggs. But I do find it interesting that there are some others that you can kind of squint at and go, maybe something changed here, you know, and there's just little clues, little breadcrumbs for us to follow. So please let me know what you thought of this video and leave a comment down below. Leave a like if you want to. Hey, subscribe if you're not. And with that said, thank you so much for watching and have a really nice